Have you ever felt climate despair or hopelessness? I know I have. We're here at a really exciting event, but the reality is that what's going on to our planet is terrifying. The entire civilization as we know it is at risk, and our actions can seem like a drop in the bucket. Just today it came out that the governments of the world are not doing enough. It turns out we need to be moving even faster. But I would like to submit to you that what we have gotten used to for the last 30 years of the climate fight is we've gotten used to the idea that it is even harder than it really is. And I think that's been going on because we have been essentially fighting climate change in the dark. Let me explain what I mean by that. So we've known for many years what's going on in the atmosphere. We can see the amount of emissions that we have. So the data we have on climate change essentially functions as a glorified alarm system. What it tells us is we should be freaking out. This is a method to have data tell us how bad the problem is, and we all know exactly what we need to do about it. That number, 52 billion tons, we need to get it to zero, and we have about 28 years to do it. This is not news. But what this doesn't tell you is how. The emissions data we have today is really primarily focused on measuring the scale of the problem, not pointing towards easier ways to solve it. And I think that is changing radically in this 3-year window, where we are seeing hundreds of new satellites launched by government agencies and private corporations around the world that are using Earth observation for the first time to radically increase what we know about emissions. The first thing this is going to do is make it possible to point fingers at who are the bad guys, to track progress a little bit more easily. This kind of granularity and other information will certainly make it easier to have a better and better alarm system. But I think the really interesting thing it's going to do is it's going to give us a lot more information about climate solutions that are easier, faster, cheaper, and more reliable than we're used to. So let me give you an example. Methane, it's a super pollutant. It's maybe 30 times as potent as CO2. We also pipe it around in high pressure pipelines, which means that when you get one leak, you could have a massive amount of this leak going into space, and the sky can be filled with this super pollutant in a very short amount of time. So we all know, of course, that we need to fix these leaks. But what you have to think about is how. So this is new satellite-based information that allows us to see where the leaks are. Methane is invisible to the naked eye. Both the right type of infrared camera, you can see it. This means that if you are thinking about sort of the 6 different areas on a grid that you might need to scan every day to look for leaks, instead you can just go to 1. And instead of physically visiting them every day, you can actually know exactly when a leak is happening and going there. Why is that interesting? Well, one thing you could say is we just lowered the cost of reducing emissions. But I would like you to think for a second about a different way of conceptualizing that same fact. Another way to say it is for the same level of effort and cost we've been doing already, which it looks like is guaranteed to increase. So we as a society are certainly going to keep putting at least as much effort as we've been putting into this as before. We just multiplied the amount of emissions that we can reduce per dollar or per unit of activity through data. And I think this is not a new concept for people in Silicon Valley. What we are doing is we are shifting from one area to another, and we are making it possible to reduce about 500 million tons of CO2 equivalent by taking the actions we are doing right now and making them more effective. We know this concept in Silicon Valley because targeted advertising works the same way. It's the case that some of the most powerful companies in the world today, Google, Meta, and so on, what they do is they gather the same techniques we were already using in advertising, and with data, they make it possible to reach more people, more impact, and we use data as multiplier. I think what's about to happen over the next 2 years is we're going to see a supercharged version of that happening suddenly in the climate fight. It means existing climate solutions are about to get a lot more powerful than we are accustomed to. Take steel. Steel is one of the most emitting sectors in the global economy. If you look at a steel mill from space using traditional methods, this is what you see. It doesn't give you very much information. But you switch to thermal infrared, and what you can see with information provided by the nonprofit Transition Zero is actually the hot spots that are literally the industrial processes causing these emissions. Why is that interesting? Because steel mills vary about 5x in how much emissions they cause per ton of steel. So this puts an entirely new, very straightforward solution on the table. Because this is one of the cleaner steel mills in the world, it is possible to switch from buying from another steel mill to this one. If you're a major auto manufacturer, if you are a construction firm, we now have data all over the world on every steel mill's carbon intensity. And it makes it very, very straightforward as we are building green solutions to find quick, easy ways to have lower carbon intensity steel. This has, by my calculations, a 2.1 billion ton CO2 equivalent per year impact potential. So the reason this is interesting is we're now counting about 4% of climate change with this one solution, and it's one of many. So Transition Zero is a member of the Climate Trace Coalition, as am I, where a large number of startups, universities, and nonprofits are starting to provide equivalent data for almost everything that emits on the planet. Shipping is another example. OceanMind is now able to track, and in 2 weeks will be providing to the world, the carbon intensity per nautical mile traveled, or per unit of cargo that you want to take from one continent to another, for every single ship. This puts on the table the possibility of switching from one ship to another. That package that you're ordering from China, that Amazon purchase, it's going to now be possible to choose to get it from a cleaner vessel. Now, that's particularly interesting in the case of shipping because most of the carbon footprint of a ship actually comes from how they operate it. So if we all start prioritizing cleaner shipping, it is very, very easy to modify the operations of the vessel with no new capital to lower that carbon footprint. That puts on the table about a 0.2 billion ton of carbon dioxide equivalent solution. You start to add these up in other sectors like electricity. So my organization, WattTime, what we track is what is the carbon footprint not just of different power plants, but of that same power plant over time. So we can see in images like this, when the steam plume means that this power plant is emitting. Why is that interesting? Take something like an electric vehicle. An electric vehicle is slightly cleaner than a gasoline car if it runs on coal. But if you can time the charging of that electric vehicle to a moment when the coal plant is turned off and the renewable energy power plants are turned on, you can multiply the emissions benefit of that same piece of equipment. You can do this with software, and the carbon potential of this is about 0.4 billion tons. But I include this example because it's a good example of how fast this can scale. Over the last 30 days, 1 billion new devices worldwide have hooked up to this technology. At this rate, by the end of the year, 10% of all smart devices on the planet are going to be running this technology. So from Honda electric vehicles to Nest thermostats to Microsoft devices, this technology is now reducing emissions. And we saw that increase so fast, I suspect it's going to be very similar in a number of sectors very quickly. Similarly, renewable energy. How does a solar panel help the environment? It doesn't suck emissions out of the atmosphere. What it does is it replaces other power plants. And so a solar panel in, say, California replaces a gas plant often, sometimes another solar panel. That exact same solar panel in Montana will typically displace a particularly dirty coal plant. That means that if you choose to build a new solar farm, not in California as you were planning, but in Montana, in the real world for the same capital cost and the same amount of electricity, you just doubled your climate effect. We're seeing organizations like Salesforce, Clearloop, and Nucor start to deploy this technique, which I like to call emissionality, taking that same renewable energy and increasing the real world emissions benefit of everything it's doing. This one solution has a technical potential of 4.3 billion tons, so that's more than the carbon footprint of Europe, that could be permanently taken off the map just by changing the locations of some facilities. We also have examples like Google Maps. So I don't know about anyone else, but I got here today by traveling on Google Maps. This is a screenshot of my phone routing me to the airport. If you look closely, you can see that the blue line, the recommended route it took me on, is a little bit slower but has a lower carbon footprint than the gray line. Google has quietly adopted the technique of defaulting users to the lowest carbon footprint route. It's an effortless, simple way. It might increase your route by 1 minute sometimes, but it magically makes it possible for us to all have a lower carbon footprint. So I don't think that this 0.1 billion tons of carbon potential by switching routes is going to single-handedly solve climate change. I don't even think that data alone that I'm telling you about is going to single-handedly solve climate change. But the thing is, it doesn't have to. Fundamentally, we all know that climate change is a team sport. And I think what is happening now is the massive increase in the availability of high-quality emissions data means that we're all going to be able to punch a little bit harder. The solutions that I alone know of make it possible for about 20% of climate change to be solved with data by multiplying the efficacy of existing solutions with existing capital stock at existing costs. I, however, am just getting started at this, and I suspect I am a small part of what is about to be a much broader ecosystem. So I wanted to submit to everyone here that knows exactly how to use data to drive more impact, that a generational change in the availability of high-quality climate data is around the corner. Over the next 2 years, you are going to see more data than you have ever seen on exactly where emissions are coming from, and exactly how they could be different, and exactly how different facilities and actors are different. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what you come up with. Thank you.